Ben, and I know Christine. So
yep. And this is David Berg.
I'm David.
He runs
hi, David.
Red Apple Campground in Maine, and then was the former chairman of the board for Arvik, and I still believe he's on the board for Arvik. So,
just so you guys know, we're totally live here. So I'm just
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's totally fine. Like, we start the show all kinds of weird ways every week. So it's always good to find a new one. So Brian Searle here with Insider Perks WCM Fireside Chats. We've got another week here of exciting stuff going on. We're going to talk to a bunch of people about some seasonal campers, things that we like, things that we don't like, things that are good, things that are bad. Ben, did I miss anything that we need to start off on before we pass it to everybody and talk about who these fantastic people are that are joining us?
No, I mean, it's great. It's another Monday. I know people love Mondays. So, I mean, this has been a great way. I think Brian and I started this in April, and it's been a great way just to kick off Monday, I guess. Just being able to talk with some great people from the industry. So it's great to be back for another show. We'll just, I think most of the regular attendees will know who Brian Searle and I am. So Brian Searle's from Insider Perks, CEO of Insider Perks, a marketing firm. And then I'm Ben Quiggle with Woodall's Campground Management Magazine. And then I think we'll just go around and let the other guests introduce themselves. We can start with Christine.
I just want to be clear, Ben, before Christine starts. Like, how do you know I wanted to be introduced as Insider Perks? Because I own 2 company now.
Okay, Insider Perks.
This should be a multiple choice question.
And CampCon.
Can we just alternate it every week?
We if you're going to keep adding companies, we don't have time to say all these companies you're going to keep starting. So
sorry.
Anybody else getting substantial feedback?
I'm sorry, David, I didn't hear you.
I'm getting triple feedback from everyone who speaks.
Oh, I don't know. It's coming through across on my end fine, so I'm not sure.
Is it? Yeah, we'll try to talk one at a time to minimize the feedback. I don't have any feedback on my end. So what about you, Christine?
I don't. My guess is it's probably your mic is too close to your speaker type of issue would be my guess. So it's looping.
Yeah, sometimes that happens with laptops, or I don't know what kind of device you're using, David.
Stephanie says in the chat, she was on the show last week, that she make sure you only have one video open. So if you have maybe 2 windows open or on Facebook or something at the same time, or you're playing, sometimes that happens too. So, all right. So we'll try to continue to work with you. We need to have just a whole show devoted to feedback and technical issues. Can we do that, Ben?
We could, I mean,
flawlessly.
I imagine the campground owners have technical issues of their own at their parks with like computers and sound equipment, and they got the cinema machines they're running now. So
how do you expect them to run all this stuff flawlessly when we can't even do it?
I don't know. We're the younger generation too. We're supposed to be able to know how to do this without thinking about it. So
all right. Well, let's get back to the introductions here, because I cut off Christine and then we went off in 20 different directions. So Christine.
So back to introduction. So Christine, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name's Christine Taylor. I am at a law firm. I'm an attorney in the Northeast. We kind of cover New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, I think is where we have attorneys barred now, but I do still help campgrounds in some other states with some local counsel. Besides just being an attorney, my background and what got me into the specific industry was my parents. When I was a child, they bought their campground right before my 10th birthday. That one was franchised Yogi Bear Shelley Stone Park. We did that for about 5 years. They bought another campground. That one they franchised KOA. That's how I know Stacey. We had that one for about 9 years. They did another KOA, and just finally they've decided to quote unquote retire, but we'll see. So when I became an attorney, I realized there was a lack of attorneys who knew about campgrounds in particular, and that's kind of what led me here.
Nice. Well, welcome. Who's next? David or Stacey? You choose, Ben. I don't want to be the one who makes somebody go last.
Well, is David, can you hear us better? Or?
I can. I took off my earbuds and I just went to my audio on the computer,
okay.
And I think we're doing pretty good.
Well, David, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? So.
All right. Well, I'm David Berg, owner of Red Apple Campground in Kennebunkport, Maine. I've owned the property now for 23 years. I serve on the Maine Board of Campground Owners, NCA Board of Campground Owners, and also the RV Board, being a previous chairman. And I have 2/3 of my sites that are filled by seasonals.
Okay, that's a lot of boards, a lot of board meetings. So
You're never bored.
you're never bored. So, and then Stacey, why don't you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about how you got involved with KOA?
Sure. Let's see. My name is Stacey Huck, and I am the Director of Field Services for KOA. I've been working with KOA for now about 7, almost 8 years, maybe. And as the Director of Field Services, pretty much all the teams that work in the field after the sale happens are teams that I manage. So I manage the business development consultants. But really, I think where the hat that I'm wearing today is I manage the quality assurance inspections for our KOA campgrounds. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah.
You want to know more?
And for the audience that isn't listening, KOA is Kampgrounds of America. That is listening. You know, some people may not know that. I don't know. Who knows? Never know who's out there. But
I feel
so
like Kampgrounds of North America, because they have Canadian parks too. But that probably wouldn't. Probably have to redo some signage and some branding. Probably too expensive to do that.
Well, no, it's the North American continent. So Kampgrounds of America. So I guess that's kind of how we think of it.
yeah.
That's true. Okay. All right. I'll buy that. I'll give you that one, Stacey.
Okay. Thank you.
So I was really interested in this topic of the seasonal campers just because I'm a member of a number of different Facebook forums, and there always seems to be, once or twice a week, there's always some campground owners that are asking about different ways that people manage seasonal campers or different issues they're having with seasonal campers, or asking people about how many seasonal campers they have at their parks and stuff like that. So it just seems like a really interesting topic. And I know Christine and Stacey, you guys actually did a session together at KOA about this topic, right?
We did. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Christine and I work together, at least annually on projects.
I guess, how did that session go? I guess what were some of the things that you guys heard coming out of that session? I guess just what were some of the questions owners were having?
I know we had a conversation. We covered a lot of the normal stuff about license agreements and not landlord-tenant relationships and how that differs in every state. But to not reiterate that, the new questions I think that came up were a lot about background checks and kind of how that tied into the people that are there. And it did flag for me, again, I hate to say this, but that you need to address things with an attorney in your state, because something that has come up for me in the last few years of working with campgrounds is that, for example, in the state of Massachusetts, sex offenders are actually a protected class in Massachusetts, so you can't discriminate against sex offenders. So that's something that feels very uncomfortable and unusual, but is something that if you're in Massachusetts, you have to be very careful with when you do background checks and turn up that information and things like that. That's something I think new to flag because it goes against your kind of gut instinct. So you need to know in your state what your specific statutes and what you can and cannot refuse people for. So I'd say that's kind of one of the newer issues that came up.
So for me as a business owner, I use a company called Good Hire, which I think charges me $95 or something one time for the whole background check, court, whatever. But it purposely allows me to avoid that constant, $375 an hour or whatever my lawyer charges. No offense, Christine, but it tells me all the things where the person lives and what I can do and what I shouldn't. It gives me alerts and says you can pay attention to this, you shouldn't pay attention to this, you can dismiss that, you can't dismiss that. And so it covers those kind of things for me without me having to kind of think about it and make sure I check all the boxes. So I know there's other platforms out there like that as well, but maybe that's kind of a small business solution to avoiding those lawyer fees.
Well, not that I would encourage avoiding lawyer fees, but I would be very specific about the programs you use. People are not necessarily infallible, and there are some, again, requirements. So if you're going to use a company, I generally suggest one that's more in your state itself. And I only tend to do that just because they've run against those heads. And also, you'd want to know if they're taking on that liability to, they could tell you what to do, but what if they advise you incorrectly? So I would just flag those generally. But yes, I actually would suggest myself using a company if you're going to do background checks, partially because there is a consent and notification part that before you're allowed to do a background check on someone. And if you don't feel comfortable, getting that proper consent yourself, I do think having a company that knows what forms to send to that person to make sure they have the proper consent is important. So by all means, I think you should use a company. I do think that could help you make sure you facilitate the process correctly.
That's one of the things I struggled with is like, what do I send? How do I do it? Who fills this out? Who do that? And so that's all automated with them. Like they won't even let you fill out a certain aspect. They have to have the employee do that because there's things that you could type. I don't know. That kind of like make you biased against them or something, or so it's
sure. Taking it out of your hands is probably a good idea, unless you're someone who's done a bunch of them and you're very comfortable. And frankly, I think that applies also to employee background checks, just since we happen to be on that topic, because I think if you have one company that can do all of them and they're doing those consents appropriately, that hopefully you'll be all together and that you won't get, smacked with some kind of discrimination lawsuit later on down the line. So definitely would advocate for using someone who knows what they're doing if you don't know what you're doing.
So just back to the seasonal aspect of it, right? Like how much in depth does a park owner need to get, or should they get, in your advice, when you're doing a background check on a seasonal? And obviously, David, you can talk to that too, because you've got seasonals at your park and what you do.
So from the legal perspective, David, you start, and then I can jump in after that.
You first, Christine, so I learned a lot from you every time I sit in one of your sessions.
So from the legal perspective, to be perfectly honest, I know a lot of campgrounds aren't doing background checks, and I think it's more important for those people who have not seasonal campgrounds, I guess. If you're short term and you're 6 months, I find fewer campgrounds do background checks for those seasonal campgrounds. It's the more southern and southwestern campgrounds, I think, that do background checks. And frankly, because in some of those states you get stuck in landlord-tenant law no matter what you do once they're over a certain day threshold, like Arizona, I think it's 180 days. You would probably want to do a background check for those because you're more likely to get stuck with that person longer and having a harder time removing them than in a state like New York, for example, where we have a specific statute that says, no, you're not a landlord, and you can remove them quite easily. So I think that, again, is kind of that flavor that the easier it is to remove them, probably the less important it is to have a background check. I'm sure peace of mind is great, but there, again, is things you can't discriminate against. So yes, you can find out that this person's been bankrupt before, perhaps, but you might be in a state that doesn't let you hold someone's credit rating against them and offering them services, especially if you're in a state that considers these seasonal campsites as housing, and then you're stuck in all those housing rules. So it definitely, there is a up and down side, I guess, of both. And maybe from a cost benefit analysis, I always say best practices and, feasible practices, maybe from a cost benefit analysis, it's not worth it to you to run background checks on everyone. But if you do decide to do background checks, you are going to have to take that expense on for every single seasonal. You can't pick 5. You have to do every single one of them. So that's kind of where I think the toss up is.
Well, what I found over the years is if we put the requirement when they fill out an application that they have to authorize us or our agents to do a background check on them, both criminal and credit. And it's interesting how many people will all of a sudden not turn in their application.
Yeah.
So it becomes a deterrent then.
So I understand this, like we mentioned the sex offenders. Obviously, I don't know how many people would want sex offenders at your campground, but what other things, I guess, David, are you looking for as far as maybe like felonies, or, what exactly do you look for in a background check?
Most importantly, things that would be concerning for us for liability purposes, such as child offensive, sex offenses, and things of that nature. Serious felonies, obviously simple theft or traffic is not an issue. And often on credit, it's not an issue either, depending on what exactly their credit problems were. And frankly, if they don't pay their rent on time, they're out anyway by my agreement. So a credit problem never becomes a problem for me.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, I'm not a campground owner. So, I've never been a campground owner. So it was kind of interesting to me. I don't know. Maybe I should definitely get into it.
I mean, we're obviously in the industry here. Is there something wrong with owning a campground, Ben?
Yeah. But so it was kind of interesting to me the first time I heard people talking about background checks for seasonal campers. I guess I had just never thought about that, and I imagine there's quite a few new owners or new people entering the market that maybe hadn't thought about that previously either. So that was just kind of interesting to me. So just the idea of, and obviously when you think about like the some of the crimes and stuff, it makes sense that you wouldn't want some of these people maybe at your park, camping with children and other things like that. So,
so that's good for seasonals. It doesn't work for overnights because you can't determine who just came off the road.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. And there's criminals too, right? So if it's a bad criminal, they're going to show up in the background check. If it's a good criminal, then they probably haven't been caught yet. So kind of set your high standards, right, for the people you want in your park.
One of the things that I recommend though too is not just on your seasonals bed, as we've talked, make sure you run it on your employees, because a lot of the campgrounds have their work campers that live on that campground for their season or for the year, and you don't want a sex offender, child molester, that kind of thing on your park too, around all of your guests. Even your daily guests. So I think that that's something to keep in mind, is to, do it for your seasonals. Definitely. In Montana, sex offenders are not a protected class. We can kick them out. And I don't know anyone who wouldn't know that within their state. I think it's pretty common knowledge, but I recommend it mainly because you've got kids running around on that campground. You need to know.
So I don't want to spend like too long on background checks, but just real quick for Dave. David, when you talked about how credit doesn't matter, right, for some of your seasonal guests. But what if you're having that person also work in the office? Then does credit change that perception if they're dealing with money or finances from customers?
Well, we don't have people work in our office that's family, but the credit check still has to be approved for us to do, or they cannot come into our park.
Okay.
I don't choose to run credit checks on everybody because I have the final say by a written agreement. If they don't pay it on time, out they go. So really, credit's never been a problem for me. And as far as thefts, you would be obviously looking for that when you're running backgrounds on your employees, but we don't have non-family employees.
Okay, got it.
We're lucky or unlucky, as the case may be.
Christine, you mentioned the landlord tenant rule. I was just reading something the other week about how the current rental I can't even say the word, the moratorium they have for COVID.
It's really
impacting that. It was really interesting because I think the article I was reading was on some Louisiana parks that had seasonal campers, and they weren't leaving. They weren't paying their rent, but they couldn't do anything to get them out, which was kind of interesting. I think when people think of a campground, at least when I do, I don't think of a tenant-landlord relationship, but I know in some states, I guess like what you mentioned with Arizona, it can easily get to that point, I guess.
Yeah, so the biggest problem I'd say just generally is lack of education of your local government. A lot of people think of campgrounds, especially ones with seasonals, as mobile home parks. And I think that there has to be the education that for the first time ever, I'm a hotel, not a mobile home park. Because you would want them to treat you the same way that they treat the hotels. Now, there's a whole host of reasons to do that, and I'm sure extended stay hotels run into similar issues. But number one, it's having the appropriate documents. So you only want a license agreement. You don't want a lease. You're not a landlord. They're not a tenant. And then there's specific parts of your license agreement that need to have specific things to make sure that it's actually a license agreement, because some courts will read it as a lease, even if you put the word license. If it looks like a lease, they'll still consider a lease. Looks like a duck, walks like a duck, is a duck type of thing. So for example, in Illinois, there was a campground case a couple years ago, and they were like, no, we can remove them. We called it a license. It was a license. And the court came down and they were like, nope, it was really a lease because XYZ, and you did it this way, and this was in the contents of it. So like, if you're in Illinois, then that's something, again, you should probably have an attorney who can look at that to tell you, hey, yes, you called it a license agreement, but because you have all these other terms in it, a court's not going to consider it a license agreement. And then I know most people have heard me say this 3,000 times, but generally a license agreement is what you want, because licenses are revocable at will, which means you can pull the plug on that at any time. So you're giving them a license to use your property for a brief time, and you can pull that permission at any time, and then they become a trespasser, and then they're not a tenant, and you don't have to do eviction. But as you were talking about, Louisiana, Arizona, some states have just length of time provisions. So once someone's literally be on your property for X days, they're considered a tenant. So yes, you're stuck in that eviction procedure. You'd have to go through whatever those rules are, and that's really unfortunate. And I have to say, the states that have strong associations have put forth a lot of legislation. New York recently passed one in the spring, making campgrounds specifically outside of landlord-tenant. Pennsylvania did one in the summer, specifically taking campgrounds outside of landlord-tenant. So I think that's important. And then the next piece is education. Befriend your local cops, your local judge, and let them know what you are and what your business is, because they might not know what it is or understand. And if they know before there's a problem, they will be much more likely to buy what your story is. I had a file in Massachusetts where there isn't a specific law like in New York or Pennsylvania, and these people didn't want to leave the campground, and they wanted to be evicted, and they wanted to drag us through housing court. And we went to a judge, and we were like, we're not housing. We can't be housing. In fact, we literally shut the water off. The park is not open 12 months a year, so there's no way we could be housing. And the judge was like, oh, you're right, that's not housing then. They just have a license to use it for recreational purposes. So that's kind of where you need to be very clear and draw those lines, because if you're stuck in landlord-tenant, then yes, all those moratoriums for evictions, all those 30-day windows, all those you can't remove people for non-payment due to COVID, you're stuck with that right now. And a lot of campgrounds are getting smacked with that currently. And that stinks. You still have to pay your mortgage. So having someone who's not paying you means you don't have the funds to pay your bills. And that is a problematic issue that's come up a lot, especially during the pandemic.
Stacey, I guess.
Sorry. I have a question, Christine, actually.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about license agreements, which we have, in all of our conversations together, would it be better to also put for recreational purposes, like you just mentioned, or just still keep it as a? So you would say license agreement for recreational purposes only.
So I said to use it can say for recreational purpose. Also, when I get people's addresses and stuff like that, I make sure to say this is their residence address, because the campground is not their residence, and this is in fact their other address for residence. And again, this is really easy for northeastern parks and northern parks. This is really hard for southern parks, who take those workers who don't have other addresses, who take, people who snowbird or whatever. Those are the best practices would be all those things, but these people who come to these southern parks and these southwestern parks probably don't have that option. And frankly, that's probably why the statute reflects this length of stay and turns them automatically into tenants, is because they're mobile workers. They don't have another residence. So this is their residence. You are more like their mobile home park. And I know that's a lot of funds for people, but that's just kind of the risk reward benefit, I guess, you're taking when you take on those type of people, that no matter what you put in the paperwork, if they don't have another residence and they're there 6 months of the year, the court's going to have a hard time being like, yeah, you can boot them immediately. So that is kind of the balance there.
I guess Stacey, Kampgrounds of America obviously operates, parks in 49 states. I don't think you have one in Hawaii, although maybe you need to expand to Hawaii.
I am more than willing to go over there, and I would be willing to even manage it. Yeah.
Ben published a story this morning about that glamping park that they're trying to build in Hawaii. So I think it's a thing. They could put another Terramar in Hawaii.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
And go manage it. I mean, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Better to do every day. But yeah, I am very curious, Stacey, like what kind of guidance you provide to franchisers, those kinds of things, what kind of literature and resources you have available. Before we get to that real quick, just a note for later, Ben, I need a licensing agreement with you for the show. So I'll kick you out for trespassing anytime I need. And then we forgot to mention that we're missing Kara today. She had a sick child, so she'll be back with us next week. That's why she's not on the show. And if you are watching live on Facebook, jump on Crowdcast with us. If you're on Crowdcast, you can chat in the box to the right-hand side. Happy to bring you guys on the show, get your feedback, all those kinds of things. So we really want you guys to participate as much as possible. So, Stacey.
Okay. So I guess the resources that KOA brings to the table is things like exactly bringing Christine Taylor in as guest speakers like you're doing here, giving them that education. But where I take it, I guess, from my hat is I look at everything from a guest perspective. And that is kind of my key focus. So when you have seasonals on your campground, I do not recommend having your seasonals next to your transient sites. Don't intermix them. Your seasonal guests, they start kind of claiming that territory, and your transients don't like it. They feel like they don't feel safe. They feel like there are intruding on other people's territory, if you will. And so if you do have seasonals, as many of our parks do, we recommend that you have a specific area on your campground that kind of segments that from your long-term, your licensed tenants, if you will. I don't know if tenants is the right word anymore. But then you want to think about your traffic flow. So you don't want all these people coming and going for your long terms, driving by all your seasonals. If you can, make it so that they kind of go to an outside road, that kind of thing. So you really cut down on that traffic, and you're not feeling like your transient guests don't feel like they are kicking up all this dust and everything. Another thing that I'd like people to think about is when, especially in our southern parks, when you have your long-term guests staying with your transient guests, what are you doing on a recreation perspective? Many of our campgrounds have a lot of potlucks, that kind of thing. Your transient guests or people that are there for a few days still don't feel comfortable if all of your long-term guests are kind of pouring in on the activities. They feel out of place. They feel like, oh, everybody else knows them. They don't feel like they're involved. And so if you do something like that and you have a big seasonal demographic on your park, you might want to think about even doing different things for the different segments in your park. So just those are some of the things to keep in mind, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And then we can talk about quality on long terms all day long, keeping them cleaned up. So I don't know if we want to dive into that yet or not, but
I guess, David, what's that look like at your campground as far as, do you keep the seasonals and the transient campers separated? Some of the stuff she spoke about, I guess, what's that look like at your park?
Well, I think everything she said is important, but it also, as I have taught at various seminars, it's up to you as a manager or an owner, in my case, to set the tone for the campground. We don't allow our overnights and our seasonals to become a problem. Everybody gets along. We're all campers. We all have something in common. Whether in a 40-foot diesel pusher, it could cost $1 million or more, or you're in a pop-up. I'm very careful on who I allow into my park as seasonals that were never campers prior.
Okay.
In other words, we live in a go-to area near the coast, so people think it'd be a great, cheap way to have a summer home. Well, I can't say never, but 99% of the time, I pick my seasonals from my overnight customers. And sometimes they don't even know that they want to be a seasonal. I convince them they want to. Because they come so many times a year, they haul their rig back and forth. I say, you're spending more than if you paid the seasonal rate and you could be here, you'd be home. So it's important. I think the most important thing to say about seasonals is they don't run your park, you run your park. And if you let them run your park, there's only one person at fault, and that is the owner or the manager.
Mhm.
Well, I think you're hitting a lot of good important topics, right? And it's backing off what Stacey's saying too. A lot of this is kind of the quality of the person and the season who is at your park. And so some of the things like we do marketing, we do reviews for hundreds of campgrounds, and so some of the frequent complaints we see about seasonals is there was dirt on their lawn, or they had all kinds of things all over, or their washer and dryer was outside, or they didn't cut their grass, or like Stacey's saying, they're different in activities and things like that. And so again, I think a lot of this just comes down to screening people and how they appear to other campers, right? Is it legal, Christine, for us to can you buy tuxes for your seasonals so they can walk around professional and
They can wear a uniform.
yeah.
So
Only if
your
you
rule,
buy it
part of
for
your
everyone.
agreement is very important. For instance, as silly as it sounds, I don't allow blue tarps. It looks like crap. If it's a tenter and it's an overnight, that's not a problem. And if they're a seasonal, they can have a blue tarp as long as we're closed,
Okay.
like over their air conditioner. But it's got to be off the day we open, or it comes off for them. We allow them to have tarps, but they have to be brown or anything but blue, because it gives you that trashy attitude. I don't allow any homemade Florida rooms. I don't allow stick builds. I don't allow things have to be either permanently done, as in aluminum railings or vinyl railings. All those things are done by your agreement. And mine's long, but all those things are cut out in advance. So they've got to keep a spiffy place, or it's just not going to stay.
But that's something that comes from over time, right? I mean, you have to gain that. It's kind of like the rules at your campground, right? Somebody's got to break it before you know it's something that should be in your rules. And so all that comes with the extensive experience.
No, I think that it's up to you as an owner to determine what kind of park you want. I'm not suggesting they all have to be like mine. There's plenty of what I would call, hold me back, redneck parks, where there is a lot of Yahoo kind of stuff going on, and that's what they want, because that's the kind of park they chose to go into, or that's the kind of park management chose it to be. I just choose for myself to be quite the opposite.
Right, I absolutely agree with you. I just mean some things like you realize that blue tarps are eyesores after dealing with a couple complaints is what I mean. So not everything that you're saying is right for every park, but there are, you become an operator, you go through certain situations, or can become learning experiences.
Yeah, there's definitely a learning curve to the quality of your campground. Many owners that have taken over or bought a campground that has had a lot of very bad seasonals, that they want to transition them into, transition this campground into a better park. Yeah, there's a major cleanup, but that's why these people are watching this session right now, so that they can learn from experience of others and kind of gain that knowledge. But I agree. Blue tarps, no. We don't let appliances out on the campground. We don't want to see, like you said, washer and dryers. We also don't want to see refrigerators. We don't want to see. Yeah. We don't like to see broken down equipment. The car that nobody's running anymore, or the golf cart that doesn't run. I think the other thing that you need to have in mind is who is mowing the lawn, who's keeping up that lawn. Is that part of your seasonal's responsibility, or is it your responsibility? So that's something then too, if it's your responsibility, you can make sure that there's no tchotchkes in the yard, because hey, it's a pain to mow around and it's a pain to trim around. So do not go to the dollar store and get the whirlywigger that spins up there and have the pink flamingos everywhere in the yard. You know what I mean?
Pink flamingos are fantastic, though, to be clear. Like David, were you at NCA the one year where they gave away the pink flamingos in the auction? I was trying to get those for Peter Pelland, and I was trying to bid him up, but they went over my bid. I was going to put him in
your bid at $5.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry, Stacey. Go ahead.
No. I mean, and those are the kinds of things that you have to think about. In as an owner, what are your guidelines, if you will? Are they natural? Like I have one owner that does only natural landscaping. You can't have the tchotchkes in the yard, but boy, you can have a nice plant. So those kinds of things. You really want to get a handle on what's acceptable for fencing. Are you going to let them fence, which makes it look even more like a seasonal park? Are you not? As you know, mowing around fencing is a hassle. So those are the kinds of things. Even natural landscaping, I've seen some of our own parks where they let them have potted plants out there, but there might be 50 of them and half of them are dead. So you might need to even limit that. Can they hang white lights up in the trees? Can they hang a chandelier between the two trees? And I've seen, trust me, I'm seeing all of this stuff. Can they take some old cheap plywood and build a shed? Or is it going to be a Rubbermaid professional looking shed? What are your guidelines? What do you want your park to be, and the quality of your park? And it's okay to lay down the law on that. But here's the deal: if you let it go once, if you let that person put that pink flamingo in there, I guarantee you, overnight you will see 50% of the rest of the park will have that stuff out. Holidays. When we talk about holidays, that you can only decorate for the holiday like a week before the holiday, and everything has to be down a week after the holiday. So your 4th of July, your Christmas right now. So you don't see Christmas stuff hanging up in, March. So that again speaks to the quality of your campground. Yeah.
I get, we're just working in a customer service business. I've worked in a few and, managed a few, and just, that making people follow the rules and being, fair to everyone, it can be difficult sometimes. I mean, sometimes these people can pull at your heartstrings, or they'll say different things, and it can just be difficult to tell people no. But it's like what you said, Stacey, it's important to be firm and even across the board, because unless you want pink flamingos,
I love flamingos, so I feel like it's an unfair rap that these pink flamingos are getting here. But
can you decorate a pink flamingo for Christmas? Like put it in a Santa suit
you
with
can wrap
there's definitely
egg, like garland, all kinds of things, Ben. Yeah. Just got to be creative.
One thing though, I think it speaks to, what are you willing to do? If you're a park that says you can have one pink flamingo, then you need to stick to that. I guess what I'm saying is you need to be firm, and you need to, I talked to, when Christina and I talked to about it, she's got her agreement, but then attached is, what are your policies and your guidelines on your park for all of this stuff? One thing that I personally hate, it's just a pet peeve of mine, is what I call site creep. You'll see these long terms, they stake out their territory, right? They got to dig in, and this is my territory. Well, wait a minute, no, you're the campground owner. It's mine. And so then before you know it, like I've seen campers or seasonals like build up in the back. So before you know it, it's not this nice, beautiful RV site. There's another fire pit and a whole other campsite in the back that they've kind of claimed as their territory. And then pretty soon you see all these chairs around it. And then you see, these smoker grills made out of old barrels. You really have to focus in too on that site creep, and make sure that they stay within those guidelines and the parameters of what you've rented to them, So site creep's a big thing in mine. Yeah.
I think that's key too, because eventually if the seasonal moves on, as a park owner, I would imagine you'd be responsible, to clean up, or you're left with the site in whatever condition it is. So I guess managing it and making it look nice, it's going to be easier turnaround, I would assume.
Yeah.
I would also tell you to blame your attorney because frankly, the more stuff you have out there, the more shoddy these structures are, the more liability issues you have, right? So like if you have a hard time conveying to your guests, like, You don't want to say, hey, this is ugly. If you rather say, hey, this is a safety hazard, I have an insurance issue with this, my attorney has an issue with this, you can always throw it back to that. I get blamed for tons of things, and that is sometimes an easier way for people to convey, what needs to be done, is because it's not because what you're doing is ugly, it's because, my insurance company doesn't allow me to have that, or my attorney, we've had issues before in the past. That's why we have this blanket rule for safety, because yours is fine, but we've had seasonals before that had really shoddy structures and someone got hurt. So that's kind of my suggestion and how to soften the blow. If it's hard for you to take a hard line, then throw your blame on some kind of legal issue that it could cause, would be my suggestion.
That's part of the reason why lawyers get bad raps.
The reason to use an attorney and pay the extra money instead of the software we were talking about is to have someone to deflect blame on.
Excellent.
So that's the selling point for the whole show.
Yeah. But I mean, and she's right. When you see these sites with the deck or the side room, if you will, or the patio room, these people are not building it to any kind of codes. They and that it could rot. It's going to be unlevel. They're just throwing it up. So she's right. You have some risk management there by the way that some of these people are building these decks or these, sunrooms, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So in our agreement, we make it clear they have to get permission prior to doing anything, whether it's building a structure, putting up stairs, putting in plants or trees. Everything has to be authorized by us first, and we make sure they're being built to certain standards. If they're not a contractor themselves, we make certain that it's being built to standards.
And then you probably give them those standards so that it's very clear that you're keeping it consistent throughout all of your seasonals. And that makes your park look a lot sharper and cleaner and neater. Yep, absolutely.
So I think one of the important things here to highlight is me coming from outside the industry, right? I don't own a campground either.
Why not, Brian?
Because it's too much work. I'm not brave enough to own a campground at all. Like that's me. Like, no way. I don't have enough guts. I applaud David and everyone who does it. So, but anyway, so there's a lot of good things about seasonals too, obviously, because all of these parks are welcoming them, and there's revenue stability and all that kind of thing. So we've talked a lot about the negatives and the hassles and the things you have to deal with in finding good seasonals. But David, why have seasonals to begin with then?
Well, first of all, when I bought my park, I inherited far more than I have today with seasonals. And what a new owner likes about that is it's guaranteed income.
Okay.
But as the years have gone by, it's really obvious you make far more money on an overnight site that's full all the time than you do on a seasonal. So it's important to find that balance. First of all, if you only allow seasonals who have been campers before, if you have them sign those agreements where you make it clear that if you're going to have cliques, every park has cliques. They only do things with their neighbors. That's fine, but they can't be bad-mouthing the other neighbors. We don't allow any sixth grade kind of attitude. If you do, you get one warning only. And all that kind of stuff is in the agreement. It can be awfully lengthy, but if you make it clear up front, if they have to sign those rules before they can even apply, then they're on notice from the beginning. But seasonals can be your wonderful friends and be like family, but you still have to treat them like customers. I never cross the boundaries. When I'm open, everyone's treated the same, whether I care for them personally or I don't care for them personally, or I consider them part of the family, or vice versa, or not. In the wintertime, I've even gone on cruises or on vacations or had people to my home. When we're in our park, it's all business.
So you bring up a good point, because Stephanie actually from Hershey KOA had this in our comment section over there. She said, I think it's very important to also not become too close to your seasonals. Otherwise, they can use that to their advantage with your friends and hanging out with them. So obviously, David, you talked about some you do, most you don't. But how would you handle a situation like that?
Well, I got burnt, as has been noted in the column here, early on when I let someone borrow my golf cart. And then I came out one day and it was gone, because I used to leave the key in it and they were taking their liberties. And I put an end to it immediately, and I've never had a problem since. We don't, we run our park. Our Number one goal is happy campers, to take care of our customers, and the top three things is still customer service, and we try to give that the top 5. But there's a fine line between friends and business, and we make sure they always know what side of the line they're on, and it works very much to your advantage. For instance, I used to have a board member in Maine, used to tell me she had the law enforcement in at least once or twice a week. And I said, well, there's only one person that's at fault for that, and that's you, because you're allowing that kind of activity in your park, or the issues to blow up. I spent 20 years in law enforcement, and I don't put up with any crap, and people know it. But I actually try to get them to realize that before they come in by what's in their agreement, and I make them sure to understand what I did for a background before, and that we want to treat everyone with kindness and caring and loving and customer service. But you're going to have to go by the rules, or I will find someone who can.
Now, David, you finesse this with people when you talk to them on the phone? Is there like a marketing approach to this? Or you just literally say, like, follow the rules or I'm going to kick your ass?
Well, I don't, no, I've never gotten that far, because I'm an old-fashioned kind of law enforcement officer where I believe we were customer-oriented there too. We were public servants. There's no reason to treat anybody with 100% kindness. However, I make it clear up front in the rules that they sign before they can come in that they're going to be held to a standard, or you're out. We don't, I've called the police twice in 23 years, and I already had the police report written for them when they got there. That's pretty good, I think.
I mean, the reason I ask is just because we see that the interaction that owners have with their customers, the tone of voice that they use, has a dramatic impact on the end result they give, not just from seasonals, but also from overnight guests as well. So,
customer interaction is very much a part of customer service and how you go about things and talk to people and treat people. And you can be firm and to the point, but you don't have to be nasty or yell and scream and say, this is my part, get the hell out. It's just not necessary. Yeah. It's all how you treat people. And you set the bar for the kind of customer you're looking for, and 99% of the time you can find them.
I would think too that, you know, setting these guidelines and following them and sticking with them is probably makes it less stressful for the camper seasonal too, because then they kind of know what to expect. They know what you expect, and they know if they have an issue with a neighbor or some other camper that it's going to be dealt with, and they don't have to worry about that, I guess.
I would say that half of my customers, my seasonal customers, would tell you I'm a very strict son of a gun. But the reason why they're still there is because their next door neighbors are treated exactly the same. Everybody goes by the same rules. We don't show partiality. And it's interesting to listen to them when they find someone new looking at the park and all the wonderful things they do tell them, because in some cases I've had 3 and 4 generations living in the same park, and it's quite lovely to be able to have customers that have been there longer than I've owned the park.
Well, that's a testament to you and everything that your family's doing there. So I think.
But it doesn't happen on its own. And that's what I try to tell people. When I first bought my park, I asked the old owner, the original owner, what do you have for problem and who are your problem people? And some people hadn't paid their rent in 3 years. I put an end to that. I had 2 huge mortgages. I couldn't put up with that for a minute. So I gave people 60 days to come in line, or out you go. And when I gave the rules out to everyone, their agreement, now that we call it, of course, I didn't then because I met Christine. It's clear what they're to deal with, and that if they can't live by them, they're not going to be able to stay. And did I have to push out some people? Absolutely, because you have a right as an owner to determine what kind of park you're going to have, what kind of customers are you looking for, what kind of experience you want them to have, and they appreciate that.
So are there ways to streamline this process? So we got a comment from Leslie Pringle over here, who's in Canada. She says we have a deck and shed approval request form that outlines the parameters for each of the above, room for their sketch with measurements, and a place for us to sign our approval. Then we take a deposit that is refunded when they remove the items. So are there places like that, or any examples that you guys know of, maybe Christine, where you've seen something like that kind of work to make it more efficient, as well as a nonpartisan or fair process?
So I think that what David said was true, is people are more accepting of rules once they see that they apply to everyone. So I think that starting there is a great place. yes, if you're just taking over a park, or frankly, if you're just trying to institute these rules and requirements for the first time, it is quite a process. But if you're a more seasonal park, I suggest, sending it out in the winter, being like, as of, when you take the renewals, this is what's going to happen, and kind of soften the blow there. But again, it's just very important to figure out what your standard is and stay with that. I love the idea of a deck shed approval form. I'm always a paperwork person, A, that's what keeps me in business, and B, that's what we build our cases or defenses off of. I know that for some people, it was hard enough to convince their seasonals to sign a license agreement that was more than a single sheet of paper. So perhaps for some people, that's a practical thing they can put in place, and perhaps for some others, it isn't. Depending on the drafting of your license agreement, I like to add some kind of sentence somewhere in it that is something like, subject to the change at any time, the rules. When you're talking about that, I have the rules as an attachment, or the requirements as an attachment, and subject to change of, Red Apple Campground at any time. So that way, what you can give notifications, and yes, they signed this agreement, but the rules and stuff that they're privy to can change over time without them having to sign a new sheet of paper. Yes, you'd have to obviously circulate that and do that, but then you wouldn't have to get them to sign off again. Because I know there's varying degrees of how much paperwork you feel comfortable putting in front of your people. So I would love to do as suggested. I think that's great. So if you can do that, then you have very clear what was approved and what wasn't. So if you try to throw someone out for not putting in approved structures, you could be like, you knew it wasn't approved because you never did this form. If that's feasible, that's great. If it's not, then you want to make sure that you have that outlined really clearly in the rules or requirements that you attach to your license agreement, so you still reserve that right to, remove them or whatever you need to do for not following the rules. So again, that is kind of the best practices and what works at your campground. But if you can put together that package, I think that's good. And then get people used to signing it. Like I always say, like, oh, we've never had paperwork. Well, those people have signed away their life on 300 other things, right? So like when I talk about waivers, I talk about, hey, you've signed a waiver for literally everything you've ever done. Like you went to a go-kart track and you've done it. Like that's not so weird. And oh, hey, they've never signed a license agreement. Yes, they have. Like when they got their parking ticket on the back, it says you have a license to use this space. A baseball stadium tickets often on the back, they're granting you a license for that seat for use for that day, for that baseball game. Like, yes, they have. It's just they haven't realized it. And although it hasn't been previously, synonymous with our industry, I think that's okay to change, especially now because we're seeing a lot of people entering camping that hadn't previously vacationed via camping before. They signed those for hotels, they signed those for resorts. It's not going to be unusual to sign those for a campground. So if they're doing that, then, if we just have to be more consistent within an industry and educate people that, yeah, we do them too. And I think that will help with the process as well. And I know we've talked sometimes before about e-signing. I think that's a thing that people can do perhaps in light of COVID and stuff like that as well. I wrote a nice article for Ben about e-signatures and where they're valid and how that works. But I do think that is a part of efficiency that might help, is sending people things ahead of time. But yes, have paperwork, educate people about it, and be firm and consistent. I wish all of my clients were like David is, because that kind of firmness and that kind of consistency is what makes your life really easy moving on.
So you're saying it's all in the presentation, though. So we should give seasonals tickets with small fine print on the bottom, on the back.
Absolutely, that is not at all illegal in most states. Definitely trick them into signing as many things.
Hey, I'm not the lawyer. I can say it. So
I think that's what Leslie in her comment here, she is, then they take a deposit that is refunded then when they remove the items. I like that idea because a lot of times the owners are left with all of the stuff and they have to clean up. They've got to rent the dumpster to get all of that stuff torn down. I'm curious, Leslie, if you can chime in, how much do you charge them? How do you base that deposit? I guess I'm a little curious on that. But I do like that. I know that, pardon?
I would
Christine?
caution only. I hate to always be that one. As if you're taking a deposit on something, you need to be very careful. There could be laws and things in your state about holding deposit money. Then it gets into the land of security deposit. You might have to hold it in a separate escrow account. Again, there's best practices in what people are actually doing, and you might choose to do it anyway. But I would flag for you that it could be something else that muddies the waters if you're in one of those states that's really particular about taking refundable deposits for people. I generally don't like taking any kind of deposit that's refundable unless you're going to give money back on all sorts of things. So I would just caution that if you're taking money from someone that you might be able to get back, that you're clear what you're supposed to do with that money when you have it. So
could you write it into the agreement then that says you will be billed $500 for cleanup when you leave, or up to 500? I mean, is there something that you could do in that, so you're still kind of getting that, but it's not defined as a security?
You can
I don't
definitely
recommend a maximum amount. I have it in my agreement
Right.
that when they are moving their unit from our park, they have to return the site exactly how it was before they
Okay.
moved in. And if they don't, they'll be billed appropriately for everything we do for time and subcontractors.
Right.
So
A lot of people do
open-ended.
like
What if they leave the unit? What if they
They
leave
do, like-
a shed? You have to
a
pay
lot
to
of-
dispose of that stuff today. So there's no limit on how much we can charge them. And they agree to it or they can't commit.
So a lot of people do an hourly fee plus expenses. I would just flag just generally penalties in contracts often have to be reasonable and equated to some kind of valuation. So sometimes being completely open-ended might be against your state's public policy. Again, I hate to be the lawyer, but it changes everywhere you go. So I would just flag that. Yes, you can put that in. And some state statutes that got rewritten have requirements. So like New York, for example, which I'm now quite familiar with, boots you to the lien law and some of those other laws in that statute on what happens and if you can sell that person's camper if they abandon it and things like that. So there are provisions in some of these state laws too that allow you to collect fees and recoup expenses for having to remove people's belongings and them as well. So that is kind of something you want to flag for yourself to look into. Do a Google search if you don't want to hire an attorney, but just definitely make
It seems like a lot of work, Christine. Like, couldn't you just put up like the car rental things in front of their rig and they just get stuck up until they pay their bill and everything?
Absolutely.
Out, right? Like where your tires.
Their RV, illegally keep it. I think that's great.
I mean, I feel like
criminal law, so if you get arrested, you can't come to me.
well, you can blame it on the previous owners. They put it in. I had no idea it was there. It's stuck. I can't, I don't know what to do.
Oh, that plausible deniability. No,
Yeah.
you unfortunately inherit your predecessor's issues as well, I would think.
This
So.
is why I don't own a campground. Too much.
So I think Leslie said she charges $200, and she said that seems to be enough motivation. And it looks like she's is working with a lawyer. I think she's up in Alberta, so she works with a lawyer. He seems to be pretty happy. But $200, I mean, $200 to some people would be quite a bit of motivation, and then to other people, maybe not as much motivation. So I guess it just depends on the camper there. So, but I guess. What's the trend? I guess we're seeing. I guess Stacey. I guess what's the trend you're seeing in KOA as far as seasonal and transient? Are more people going to like the transient sites, or are more campground owners taking a look at adding seasonal sites?
Well, they added seasonals because COVID this year, right? They wanted that steady income. And so I don't know that it would be a general practice as much as it was enough to get them kind of through this year to figure out what was going to happen. So they added seasonals more at the beginning of the spring before we knew, hey, this is when we're going to be open. We like to think, obviously it's the owner, they're independently owned. Sorry, it's my dog. If I put her down, she'll start whining, but everyone, she likes to be,
I got one too.
little puppies. Yep. So if I put her down, you'll start hearing her bark. So she's sitting on my lap.
Exact same problem I have. She won't leave me alone.
Yeah, she won't. So what was I saying? I got completely.
Sorry.
So you actually, according to what David was saying, yes, you do make more money on your transient sites even when they're not 100% occupied. So you need to do the math. Sit down and do the math. Sit down and determine what type of park you really want to be. Do you want to be a mix? Do you want to be 100% one way, 100% the other? Do you want, that really is a business decision that you need to make. I know some people like to say, I like to have the seasonals because it covers at least my mortgage, Others are, nope, I don't want any seasonals at all. I don't want that hassle. I like to be an in and out park, and that's okay. I think what we're coming down to it is make sure whatever you do, they're good quality people and campers that take pride in those sites. There's in the campgrounds that I work with, all over, there's such a demand for seasonal sites that you don't have to put up with it. You don't have to put up with anything because everyone I've talked to has a waiting list. Well, then kick them out and bring somebody in that's better. That won't be a hassle. Or I didn't say evict, Christine. I didn't say evict. Come out.
Revoke their license.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. If you don't meet, and Christine can say, if you have to give them so many warnings or what, I don't know that part of it. But what I'm saying is, you don't need to put up with anything other than the best. There's too much of a demand out there, and if they're not the best, then move on. If they're not meeting your guidelines, your rules of no pink flamingos, no, you can only have 3 potted plants and you have 50, and they keep, you have to keep calling the cops on them because they're loud and noisy. I mean, you don't have to. Reach out and find another seasonal that is more to your liking of what you want your park to be.
I feel like there's a huge market here for somebody to open a seasonal park for all the bad seasonal people.
That would be a headache to
There's
run.
parks for them,
There are parks for them, yes.
and people are very happy to have them.
Yeah. And like you said, it's your business model. What do you want it to be?
Well, that's a good
And
point.
also, I would recommend to people who have a waiting list, never assign a number to that waiting list, because some people are never going to make it to the top.
Right.
Yeah. And just I guess, I lost my train of thought. I'm getting closer to 40 and this happens all the time. So I don't know.
Wait.
I guess after
It only gets better from here, Ben.
it only gets better for me. I guess working, dealing with difficult seasonal campers was just one small area I wanted to touch on. I know there's a ton of positive experiences in seasonal campers. I guess, when you're looking at a seasonal camper that has an issue, I guess sometimes it can get real complicated, or at least some people make it look real complicated, I guess. What are some best practices to diffusing a situation, I guess? David, maybe you have experience with that.
Well, I would tell you, when I first got to the park and it was kind of ratty in places, I included guidelines for appearance. And one of the items where you had to be skirted, your unit had to be skirted, because seasonal people have a lot of stuff, on being polite.
Right.
So if they want to store it underneath, you shouldn't have to see it next door, and you shouldn't have to see theirs next door. So I required people within 30 days, they had to skirt with an approved type of material, vinyl in my case. And one person said to me, I've been here for 15 years and I'm not going to do it. I said, you don't have to do it, sir. That's your right. But if you choose not to, you're going to go out. He said, you won't throw me out. You've got big mortgages. I said, that's correct, sir. However, when I pen you out for not following the rules, I'll get someone in here who will. And it'll make the park look much better. And within 2 months, because he asked me a few things more, and I said, look, what you see is what you get. I've laid out all the rules, and we're going to enforce them, sir. I'd love to have you stay, but if you can't, well, that's the best I can do. And he was still there until the day he passed, and he bought a brand new unit the following year and put in a big park model. And he became a dear friend, actually, and all because of how you manage your park.
Well, a lot of it's communication too, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
It's not assuming that they know what you want. It's telling them, and again, obviously the way you tell them and the way you lay it out, but that consistency and that helps a ton.
Well, I grew
Yeah.
up in a family business, and my folks taught me a long time ago, you don't put up with one or two bad cats and lose 20 good customers because of it. And so I've tried to live by that kind of thing. I also was taught that you do something for somebody just because you can, not because you expect something in return. And I've tried to live by that. It's the same way of giving our customers a little more than they expect.
Yeah, and I think that's something, when I look at the forums, sometimes I read, people are just nervous about losing the seasonal campers that they have, who's going to fill the spot. But especially right now, I would think that there's a ton of options, if you're having a difficult time with a seasonal camper. Now, especially, is a great time to, maybe move on and fill that spot or do something else with it, I guess. I don't know what you guys thought on that.
Camping is becoming more and more popular, as we saw, this year just really grow once parks were able to open. We've had the most influx of brand new campers into the camping world than ever before, because people felt safe with COVID. They could be in their own RV, that kind of thing. So I think from that, yes, we are going to have even more people that love the lifestyle that are going to want to keep that that camper, that RV on that campground for the summer, because they don't want to haul it back and forth, right? They might not even have the experience or the comfort level of hauling a fifth wheel all the time. So I see the seasonals, that waiting list, if you will, growing. So
Yeah.
I think that because of this, again, you don't have to have the riffraff unless you want the riffraff, but you don't have to. You can have a very nice, beautiful, quality seasonal park like David's running, obviously, and still have a good mix so that your transients still feel very comfortable camping in your park when there's a lot of seasonals.
I guess back to Brian's point about seasonals too, one of the great things about having good seasonals is that I think for a lot of park owners, a real benefit to have at the park, because they can help you with different things. Some of them really want to get involved with the park. They can volunteer. They'll set up, maybe different programming that they want to do. Maybe, maybe they want to do like a sewing thing every week, and they'll organize that themselves. So, I mean, it's great to have those really good seasonals that want to invest in the park, and it's, cheaper for the owner, and the owner doesn't have to do too much. And it's great to let them maybe get involved and do things at the park. So, I guess, David, do you have any seasonals like that like to do different things at your park?
I do. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure I should mention it here, but this past year, because of the reduction, we couldn't use our hall because of the restrictions from the governor. One of our seasonals started to stitch and bitch. And all the ladies would get together, it happened to be mostly ladies, and just do crafts and carry on. I didn't come up with the name, they did, needless to say.
It's fantastic.
But yes, I think they can be your ambassadors as well in many, many ways. I mean, I think I get as much out of my seasonals for marketing worth as the very large nut that I spend to market on my own and advertise.
I think you should live stream that next year, David, if it continues.
And while you're, thought about all of the new people in our industry, that could be another fireside chat, because we're dealing with people that don't have a clue on how to camp, meaning we need to help them, and they don't have a clue on what the rules are or not allowed as far as not cutting through people's sites and using the roads and all that kind of thing. So it really opens a whole new way. We need to write our rules for overnights to understand, because they have to read them, but they have to understand what's acceptable and what isn't, whereas we're used to dealing with pretty much regular campers who understand etiquette, camping etiquette, probably is the way to put it.
And that's exactly, we're building that specific thing out in KOA right now, is a camping etiquette booklet, if you will. And because, don't cut through people's campsites, clean up after your dog. Some of the things that we know that are pretty common, new campers don't. It's like golfing. There's so much etiquette in golfing. If you're a new golfer, you have absolutely no idea that you can't pick it up off the, out of the field and throw it back into the fairway. I mean,
you can't?
Well, My husband and I
Only
were willing,
watching
as
you.
long as we were walking alone, because we would still be out on the golf course. Yeah. But yeah,
Well,
they get involved.
I would like to thank KOA for all over the years, always sharing with us your ideas and your surveys and so on and so forth. You've helped the entire industry. And I'd be interested in looking at that when it's ready too, if we could maybe agree to steal a few things from you on that respect. Because it's very important to take care of these new people and make them into good customers you want back, and also make their lives easier, because I'm finding that the business is so busy in our industry that it's just get them off the lot. Don't even teach them how to operate them or what they have for options on them. And sometimes it's very time consuming for us to take the time, but we need to do that for the safety of our other guests and our equipment, of course.
And I mean, we've, I think Brian and I have touched base on the new camper thing a few times here. I think we've had some discussions with other guests. I don't think we've dedicated a whole show to it, but it's definitely something a lot of owners have been experiencing this year. And you guys were talking about the etiquette thing, so I just wanted to share. I think we shared this a couple of weeks ago too, and it's turning into an ad for Campground Views. I don't know, but he created an camper etiquette guide that I think a lot of people have had positive feedback. I know when we shared it a couple of weeks ago, there was a lot of positive feedback. So that's a tool that you can use. I don't know what KOA's is going to look like, but that should be really interesting to see what you guys come up with on the etiquette stuff as well. I think we had Tony Dress here in the comments asked about utilities. Do you charge a flat monthly fee and include all our utilities, or do you break out their utility use? I know, I just spoke with like Wade Elliott from Utility Supply Group and some other electric supplier companies, and I know they're definitely seeing more people metering sites. And if you're going to do like a monthly fee, they're figuring out how much electricity is typically used at that site, and then factoring that into their monthly fees. I guess, how does that work at your park, David?
We meter, and you have to be careful because each state has its own responsibilities, restrictions as what you can charge. We can charge an additional fee for the administration. We choose not to do that. But it's amazing how much. I bought a park that had no meters, and I belonged to a local co-op that electric was very cheap. And our old friend Dick Hartford from Evergreen beat it into my head for years and years and years that I needed to meter. And I didn't do it because my electricity costs were so reasonable. And he came down one time and said, I'm here, we're going to put in the meters if you're going to help me or you're not. Because he was also a master electrician. And so we did it, and we paid for it as we should. And it was amazing that what he said is, watch the first year how their bills will pop in half. And within a year or two, you'll be right back where it was before, but they'll be paying for it. You will. And that's absolutely true, at least in my part.
I think the metering just makes sense. Anytime I've heard Wade Elliott talk about it, I mean, if you have campers,
fair, though, Wade's a little bit biased, but continue. Sorry.
Yeah, Wade is a little bit biased, to be fair, but
not even. No, he's not.
Well, he sells the things. If you don't meter, then you can't buy them. So
he does things every single day on our behalf to save us money from spending money in his business.
Yeah. Wade does a lot of great things for the industry. We're not saying he's not doing anything good for the industry.
Yeah. So
just maybe a disclaimer, that he owns a utility supply company. But anytime I hear Wade talk, it always just makes sense, because if I'm an RVer, why would I care about electrical usage if I'm not being charged for it? And, he always mentions, the RVers that leave their air conditioning going all day. I imagine that stops when they start getting metered. So
the first year anyway, and then they, like David said.
Yeah.
Well, especially seasonals that may be weekend seasons, and they go home during the week, leave the air conditioning on the entire week.
Yeah. I mean, there's no reason for them to be cooling a place that's empty, I would think. And, and if they do, they should be paying for it. So, I guess, I think it's 12:15, so we're getting pretty close. I guess, do we have any other questions or comments that anybody wanted to mention?
I think there's room here. Oh, Christine was trying to talk. Are you muted?
Oh,
I don't know. We can't hear Christine right now, so we'll see if we get her back in a second. I don't know. You were?
Well, and then, of course, we could make a lawyer joke and say, how often do you ever see a lawyer muted? But we're not going to.
A lawyer is a Campground owner walking to a bar.
We all love you dearly.
But
Quiggle, I think there's room for us to start like a YouTube video series on camper etiquette, and we could have you go to the campground and do all the things that they shouldn't do and film it, and then I feel like that would be really popular. We could make it super funny for
yeah. I mean, we just have to find a volunteer campground to do it at. So preferably around where I live. But that you definitely could do something like that. I wonder, Go RVing has some things too, if people are interested, where they're actually doing like how-to videos and some different things on their end and some camper etiquette stuff as well. So if anybody wants to check out Go RVing, there's definitely some resources there that could be used on Facebook or other social media sites as ways to connect with your campers, I guess, this winter and get them prepared for next spring. So
do you have a link to that? Because I didn't know Go RVing was doing that. So
yeah, 1 second. I'll have to find the link to some of those stuff.
Christine,
do I work now?
Yeah.
See, I know tech. I just stole my mic for something else. So the one thing that I would just mention really quickly, and again, since we don't actually know where we're going to be next summer with the pandemic and all of that, is that you want to spend some time looking into force majeure clauses, both on your own seasonal agreements and things that you have signed. That's something that I've never really had to have the talk with about people before, but since people couldn't open on time this year, and we've been changing phraseology to expected open date or expected license term, because we don't know if we're going to get shut down again and have issues like that. And frankly, in New York, I had some campgrounds that got smacked with like 20 attorney general consumer complaints being like, you didn't open and campgrounds near me were open, since New York left it up to the counties. So I would just maybe contemplate that in your agreement, even if your agreement was really great beforehand. And frankly, it might have been. This isn't something that the force majeure clause hadn't gotten this much attention pre-pandemic. So if you don't have one, think about adding one, because you don't want them to try to hold you to a contract you can't fulfill because of government intervention. So definitely just keep that piece in mind, because as much as I'd love to say this will all be wrapped up by May, I know that we thought we'd be wrapped up much quicker. So please do consider adding that and figuring out how that works in your contracts. And then not really seasonal related, but look into the ones you've signed with other people and see what they have there too, because that is something that's going to get a lot more screen time, if you will, moving forward. So that would be my one last thing to throw out there.
I know a lot of that's location specific, but blanket wise, like, you're talking about something that covers just lockdowns or the whole gamut of force majeure?
So force majeure is this really fun thing where you have to be broad and specific at the same time. Thank you, legal system. So you have to be broad enough to cover any type of thing that might happen, but specific enough that that it's not like they gave away all their rights. So I would generally have been adjusting ours to say pandemic, maybe COVID-19 in particular, government mandated shutdown. Those are things that we've been chucking into our force majeure clause that might have been more broadly said something like,
Government restriction.
Government restriction or natural disaster. We want to be a little bit more specific now that we know there's this thing where a government can say that we're non-essential and shut us down. I would just kind of try to contemplate that in your force majeure language now.
That's perfect. I'm available for all those kind of scenario hirings. Wiggle knows this stuff already. So, alien abductions, bear attack.
Oh my word! He didn't get off the bear for a while, so he hasn't spoken about the bear for a while. But the bear was getting abducted.
But it's fine. If the bear attacks your camper, it's covered under your insurance. We found that out. The insurance.
Yeah.
So
There's lots and lots of stuff. And I mean, as a segue, I guess just to paperwork in general, make sure that you have your seasonals signing their waivers and general releases too. That's not a transient only thing. Just because they're your friend and have been there for 4 generations doesn't mean that when the medical bills hit them, that they're not going to turn around and sue you. Seasonals are not exclusive to not suing you. So definitely make sure you are having them sign the same paperwork you're having transient guests sign too. So that would be important.
I think that's all I got, Ben.
Yeah, I put the link to the Go RVing thing in the chat, and I also put it on our Facebook. But yeah, I mean, if you just scroll through the Go RVing page here, the expert advice, I think there's a lot of materials that, you know, campground owners could probably take from this and maybe even use it on their social media sites or on their websites. And they have how-to videos and different things. So something definitely to look at if you're expecting a lot of new campers next year, which I think everyone I've spoken with is expecting a very busy 2021 season with probably a lot of new and first-time campers or maybe second-year campers, which still have a lot to learn, I would imagine. So, but it's been great talking with everyone. Thank you, David, Stacey, Christine, for coming on. I always learn a bunch when with these shows that we do, and you guys have all been extremely helpful in helping us sort through some of the seasonal topics. So I hope you guys all have a great holiday season.
Thank you for the legal advice. Thank you for the things that KOA does. David, thanks for teaching us that you can be kind of a pacifist owner and still get the results that you want. All those kinds of things. So very valuable. I appreciate all your input. Have a great day, guys.
All right. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Bye.